The Newsboys Strike of 1899 by Damon, Jake, and Cole.
From 1893 to 1899, two of the richest publishers in the country had the same idea. The names of these two men were Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. They found out a way to make even more money than the two millionaires already earned. The Spanish-American War was going on at this point, and before the war, papers were 50 cents per hundred. This made a huge reason to sell more and more papers. Although the reasons for papers went up, the sales of the papers went down. Pulitzer and Hearst tried to figure out a way to make up for the money for the papers. They succeeded and targeted the newsboys, who were the main buyers of the papers. They intentionally rose their prices of the papers from 50 cents up to 60 cents. Although it would not be now, that 10 cents was a really big difference. Because the newsboys wanted 50 cents papers, they went on strike, refusing to buy the papers in the end. The two millionaires never did drop the prices, but they agreed to buy back all the papers that weren't sold.
The causes of this strike.
Alfred Quinn gave a great point of view for the Newsies. We're going to fight for our rights, and I guess we'll get them if they fly-by-night kids ain't newsboys as a business can be shoved out of the way. We struck against the Journal and the World, and we're not selling no more of their extras. Why? Well, you see, they've put up the price to 60 cents, and we won't handle them no more. There's 500 of us, and we're going to make a fight for it. The strike began in the year 1899. There were many children that were working for a very low pay rate. One of the jobs that the kids had is a newsboy. Some of these kids that work were trying to earn money for their families. Although some kids that were working were trying to make money for their families, there were many more children that were orphans and runaways. There were both boys and girls in the newspaper selling business. The reason kids with families needed more money is because at this time the Great Depression was happening and there were very few jobs. Another fact is that many of the kids that worked were treated unfairly by the adults they were working for. This will be about a particular unfair event that set the newsboys off and made them decide to go on strike. Some of the most popular newspapers that the newsboys carried were the New York Journal and the New York World. People that owned these were Pulitzer and Hearst. They decided that since the Spanish-American War had begun, that they should try to make even more money and raise the prices for the papers from 50 cents to 60. What this means for the newsboys is the amount that the newsboys had to pay the publishers to get the papers and start selling them had increased by 10 cents. This was a big difference to the newsboys because they were already in very bad condition. A few examples are, first, homeless immigrants. Another one is some 6-year-olds were wandering into saloons. Lastly, there were even a newsgirl tending a week-old baby while selling papers. Some are ragged and dirty. Some have no coats, no shoes, and no hat. I remember one cold night seeing a dozen of the little homeless creatures piled together to keep each other warm beneath the stairway of the New York Sun office. The senator sent the Newsies a heartfelt letter and $100 for funds. Philip Singh, former newsboy, gave a speech. You are the rising generation, and if older ones can't support you, they can at least treat you fairly. Now keep up the fight. Don't violate the law, don't use dynamite, but stick together and you will win.
During the strike.
The Newsboys Strike started on July 16, 1899. They refused to sell papers all over the city. Jack Kelly from the movie Newsies represented Kid Blink, the leader, who is famous for having a thick New York accent, an eye patch, and giving a speech after each of the riots. He gave this speech to some of the strike members, friends and fellow workers. This is a time which tries the heart of men. This is the time when we gotta stick together like glue. But there's one thing I want to say before I go any further. I don't believe in getting no feathers papers from him and tear him up. I know I done it. Kipling said no more violence and they needed to work together to win the strike. But I'm sorry for that. No, there ain't nothing on that. We know we want what we want and we'll get it, even if we blind. Them 10 cents is as good to us as the millionaires, maybe better. I shouldn't be surprised that it's as good as a quarter to them. Anyway, we want it, and we'll strike and restrike until we get it, won't we, boys? But let's not stop no more poor drivers and dump over their wagons like we done in Madison Street the other day. I know I was one. No, let's not do it no more. Say will we, boys? Say, you remember that day in Wall Street when the gents turned money to us and told us to buy decent papers?
Remember, say, don't you boys? That's all right, but say, let's not hurt no more poor drivers. We won the fight in 1893. We ought to win in 1899, don't we, boys? You know me, boys, don't you? We'll stick together like plaster, won't we, boys? The Newsies met by the front of the Tribune building and planned a parade down every major street in New York with their banners. Kids usually started work at age 7 and worked 6 days a week. When business was bad, they sometimes had to eat their papers. The first reported actions took place in Long Island City, when the Newsies discovered that a journal delivery man had been cheating them with short bundles. On July 18th, they tipped over his wagon, ran off with his papers, and chased him out of town. Flushed with success, the boys demanded a price rollback and notified their suppliers that they would no longer buy the Hearst or Pulitzer papers. Word traveled swiftly to downtown Manhattan Newsies in City Hall Park on July 19th. They organized their union and announced a strike.
After the strike. This practice had a disastrous impact on the newsboys. Not only were they making less per paper, but because they were stuck with the investment in unsold papers, they were often unable to pay for a bundle the next day. Newsboys got together and decided to refuse to sell the Journal in the World. On August 1st, 1899, the World and Journal offered the newsboys a compromise. It was that the price of 100 papers would remain at 60 cents, but they would buy back any unsold papers. Even though Pulitzer and Hearst did not lower the prices of their newspapers, they did agree to buy back any unsold papers. This resulted in the union of the newsboys to depart. The newsboys accepted this deal, ending the strike on August 2nd, 1899. The craziest part of this whole thing is that Pulitzer and Hearst did all of it just for money. This event inspired many other strikes to occur in other parts of the country. For example, the Butte, Montana Newsboys Strike in 1914 and the 1920s Louisville, Kentucky Newsboys Strike. In addition, a few decades later, there was an introduction of an urban child welfare practice that led to the improvement of the newsboys' quality of life. Newspapers aren't sold by children anymore. In fact, it's illegal for children to work at all today, which is a very good thing. Even though a lot of people didn't like it, without this strike, a lot of different important stuff would not have happened.
In the end, this strike shows that you can do anything if you put your mind to it.
Concluding statement.
The newsboys had a very good reason to go on strike, but you need to understand that when Pulitzer and Hearst raised the price for the papers, no one cared because most newsboys were homeless and poor. It also didn't help that the newsboys were children. Also, very few of them had families. The Newsboys Strike of 1899 had many effects on our life today, even though it was 121 years ago. One of the most important things that it helped change is that you are unable to work under the age of 14 years old. Another thing that the strike changed is how much money the newsboys earned. They started by paying 50 cents for 100 papers to 60 cents for 100. After the strike, the paper's price never dropped back down, but Pulitzer and Hearst decided that they would buy back any papers that the newsboys didn't sell. So that is how the strike helped.